The Second World War was the largest, most destructive, and bloodiest conflict in human history. Every continent felt its impact, yes, even Antarctica. Military operations took place in China, France, Hawaii, Iceland, Somalia, Sri Lanka, the Arctic, and far beyond. It was fought in trenches, on horseback, in the air, under the sea, and for the first time ever in space, with nuclear weapons introduced as a terrifying new force. World War II reshaped the world. The European empires of Britain, France, Holland, and others never fully recovered, and the remainder of the 20th century would be dominated by the superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. In Asia, the war ultimately paved the way for the Chinese Communist Party's victory, caused the partition of Korea into two zones, and led to India's emergence as an independent nation. So, when did it happen, what exactly unfolded, and who fought where? Here's everything you need to know. When did World War II begin? That depends on your perspective. The war was fueled by a hunger for empire, territory, power, wealth, and resources. Three dictatorships, Germany, Italy, and Japan, collectively known as the Axis powers, spent the 1930s expanding aggressively. Germany dominated Europe, Japan pushed into northern China, and Italy invaded parts of Africa. Japan and China had been locked in a brutal struggle since at least 1937, which some historians consider the true start of the war. For the United States, however, the war began in December 1941, when Japan launched a surprise attack on the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. For most Europeans, Canadians, Australians, Indians, and others living in European empires, the war began in September 1939, when Adolf Hitler, the German dictator, invaded Poland. That invasion triggered a chain reaction. Multiple countries declared war on Germany, setting the stage for the Second World War in Europe. The war's conclusion is somewhat clearer. By 1945, Germany and Japan were catastrophically defeated and occupied. But why does September 1939 matter so much in Europe? Hitler's Nazi regime had dismantled democracy in Germany, persecuted political opponents, Jews, and other minorities, and begun constructing concentration camps. His ultimate ambition was to expand Germany, reclaiming territories lost after World War I, and creating a vast empire in the east. Rich farmlands in Ukraine and the oil fields of the Caucasus were among his dreams. After annexing Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia, he set his sights on Poland. Western Poland had been part of Germany before the First World War, and Hitler believed it rightfully belonged to Germany. To achieve this, he struck a secret deal with Joseph Stalin, the communist dictator of the Soviet Union, to invade and divide Poland between them. On September 1, 1939, German troops crossed the border, and within hours, Europe was plunged into war. Hitler had miscalculated. Britain and France, which had tolerated his previous expansions, could not ignore this invasion. They declared war on Germany, dragging their empires, including Canada, India, New Zealand, Australia, and many others, into the conflict. Germany and the Soviets quickly divided Poland. The British and French launched a minor counterattack into Western Germany, but it quickly fizzled. Meanwhile, the Soviets attempted an invasion of Finland but faced defeat, only reclaiming minor territory the following year. Across the Atlantic, German submarines and warships targeted Britain's shipping lanes, marking the beginning of the prolonged Battle of the Atlantic. Passenger ships, like the Athenia, were sunk within hours of the war's outbreak. Allied naval forces retaliated fiercely, destroying German cruisers like the Admiral Graf off the coast of South America. In Europe, a tense standoff emerged along the French-German border. Life in Britain became dangerous even on the roads due to blackout restrictions, but combat deaths would soon far exceed civilian accidents. April 1940 marked a turning point. Both Axis and Allied powers invaded Norway to control crucial resources, particularly iron ore and oil vital for German steel production. Germany rapidly conquered Denmark in hours and deployed its fleet to Norway, evading the British Navy partially due to poor weather. The Allies attempted to reinforce Norwegian defenses but were overwhelmed. By May, the final Allied troops and the Norwegian royal family were evacuated, a humiliating setback that toppled the British government. Winston Churchill stepped in as Prime Minister on the very day Germany launched its next assault, Western Europe. Germany's blitzkrieg strategy overwhelmed Luxembourg, Holland, Belgium, and France. Using tanks, aircraft, and vehicles to surge through enemy lines, they caught Allied forces off guard. Troops sent into Belgium to counterattack were encircled and forced to retreat to Dunkirk, hoping for evacuation by the Royal Navy. Over a week, an astonishing 340,000 soldiers were rescued using every vessel available, from battleships to small civilian boats, though nearly all heavy equipment had to be abandoned. Hitler's Axis partner Italy joined the conflict by invading southern France. With French resistance broken, Germany dominated Western and Central Europe. Inspired by Churchill, Britain's empire resolved to resist at all costs. Hitler then turned east, eyeing the vast territories of the Soviet Union. The Luftwaffe initiated the Battle of Britain, the first primarily aerial conflict in history. German bombers initially targeted RAF airfields to achieve air superiority, but Britain's radar system and determined pilots in Hurricanes and Spitfires resisted fiercely. When bombing shifted to London to break civilian morale, the Blitz began, yet by mid-September Germany had failed. The RAF remained undefeated, and a German invasion was impossible. Britain also faced Italian forces in the Mediterranean, with campaigns in North and East Africa proving grueling. 1941 intensified the war. Italy's failed invasion of Greece forced Hitler to intervene, overrunning Yugoslavia and Greece, but wasting precious resources. By June, Hitler shocked the world with Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the largest military offensive in history, involving nearly 4 million men, thousands of tanks, and massive air support. Despite massive initial Soviet losses, fierce resistance and brutal winters halted German advances, marking the beginning of an unrelenting struggle on the Eastern Front. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japan sought resources to fuel its war in China, aiming at Southeast Asia. Fearing U.S. intervention, Japan struck first. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft devastated the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, killing 2,500 Americans. Roosevelt labeled it a day of infamy, and the U.S. declared war on Japan. Adolf Hitler, in turn, declared war on the United States, making World War II truly global. Japan simultaneously invaded British Malaya, Indonesia, and the Philippines, securing much of Southeast Asia. 1942 proved decisive. Japan expanded rapidly across Asia and the Pacific, reaching India's doorstep and bombing Australia and Sri Lanka. Germany's advance into southern Russia reached Stalingrad but stalled in brutal urban warfare. The Americans achieved a pivotal victory at Midway, ambushing the Japanese fleet after breaking naval codes and destroying 4 carriers. In North Africa, the British halted the Axis advance at El Alamein, initiating a long retreat. Allied forces landed in Morocco and Algeria, trapping Axis troops between them and the British Army from Egypt. Soviet counterattacks at Stalingrad eventually surrounded and defeated the Germans, marking a turning point. 1943 and 1944 saw the Allies dominate the skies of Europe, devastating German cities and infrastructure with relentless bombing. British raids targeted dams, while Soviet defenses repelled German offensives in the east. In North Africa, Axis forces surrendered, and the Allies invaded Italy, removing Mussolini and progressing up the peninsula despite German resistance. In the Pacific, American forces advanced island by island, securing critical territory and inflicting heavy losses on the Japanese Navy. By 1944, the stage was set for liberation in Western Europe. On June 6, D-Day, 150,000 Allied troops landed in Normandy via 7,000 ships, aircraft, and gliders. Intense fighting on the beaches eventually gave way to a breakout, and by August, Paris was liberated. The Allies' advance continued, although operations like Arnhem met fierce German resistance. The winter of 1944-45 saw Hitler's final offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, repelled by massive Allied reinforcements. 1945 brought the Axis collapse. Allies liberated northern Italy, crossed the Rhine, and advanced into Germany. The Soviets surged through Poland and East Germany, surrounding Berlin. On April 30th, Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide. Germany surrendered on May 7th. Over 43 million people had died, and Europe lay in ruins. In the Pacific, American forces captured key islands, preparing for a final invasion of Japan. But a new weapon changed history. In August, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing hundreds of thousands and forcing Japan's surrender on September 2nd. The Soviet Union also entered the war in the Pacific, attacking Japanese forces in northern China. The world after World War II was unrecognizable. Europe's east fell under Soviet control, while Germany was divided into East and West. America emerged as a nuclear-armed superpower, replacing weakened British and French empires. Japan was occupied and rebuilt by the United States. Korea was split between communism in the north and democracy in the south. Vietnam initiated its independence struggle, and China fell under communist control by 1949. In countless ways, the modern world we live in was forged by the catastrophic events of World War II.